Well, glad to be back on this Monday morning and getting things started on another busy week. And it looks as if we're going to have a little rain in the weather forecast coming up overnight and into tomorrow. And most people would say that is likely very much needed moisture throughout the area. Some of the things we're going to be talking about today. Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing will join us in the latter half of this first hour. And in just a few minutes, we're also going to have a guest coming by, Jeanette Rowe from the Twin Falls Senior Center. We'll be talking with her about just a promotion they have going on, but also the constant need they have for volunteers to help out with various projects that they're undertaking. So those things are on the way. I've got a laundry list here of about 15 different items today. But if I could, I just wanted this morning to start out making an observation. It struck me the other day I am now coming up on my 90-day mark here on the job. I don't know that that's significant. 30 may be significant. 60 may be significant. 1 year may be significant. Or you could be like Kelly Class and have 44 years in the radio market. That's significant. But I can say this much. In a month and a half to 2.5 months now, going on 3 months, I have made a few observations in my travels around the area. And I'd like to share some of those this morning, at least right off the top, because some of these things have actually been, I won't say they've been bugging me, but you recognize things driving down a street, and at some point, the red flags go up, and you find that you got a question or two about what's happening. 51 right now at our studios. It's 8 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. You can also hear us anywhere around the world on newsradio1310.com. That would be our website. You can just click on the Listen Live icon and take us with you anywhere that you happen to go. I left church yesterday morning, and I had to drive into the radio station just for a quick errand. And I took some back streets on the way from church, finally managed to get to Blue Lakes Boulevard, down the street, then to Park Ave. So, maybe 5 minutes. But in that stretch, and I've noticed this on Saturday too, I went out for a long walk on Saturday afternoon, walked around several neighborhoods near where I live. Now, any city, any community. And I grew up in a small town where if you walked down Main Street, you had brick streets. And they paved them eventually when I was a bit older. But when I was a kid, we had brick streets. And snowplows had difficulty with that, so they ended up paving it over. But we had brick streets. We had 3 parks. One had a lovely gazebo in it. And it just looked wonderful. But if you got to one edge of town, on the north edge of town, there was a grocery store, and behind the grocery store there had been a series of old chicken coops that had sat there for probably 100 years, and a few old houses that had been used by the people who owned the chicken coops. The chicken coops were by that point gone, but the hovels were still behind the grocery store, so you could go grocery shopping in a modern supermarket, but when you went into the store and you came out of the store and you looked over to the side, you could see that neighborhood of clearly run-down homes. And every community has a section like that. There have to be people, I guess, no matter where you are around the world. A comment once made by our Lord and Savior was that the poor will always be with you. And so you're going to have some of that in any community. And you've got an old section of Twin Falls, and you have a new section of Twin Falls, and the new section is all of these big McMansions going up. In fact, I went out to Shoshone Falls yesterday afternoon, and on my drive back, I noticed some of the heavy equipment working in some of the fields. There are more of those neighborhoods coming to this area. But in the old section of the city, and I understand that this is really a crime-free zone, when you look around the country and you see other cities of comparable size, you have much higher crime rates. You've got to give people here credit because the culture is one of being law-abiding and respecting your neighbors. But at some point, how far do you have to respect them? Driving in, I pulled up on a corner and was ready to make a right turn yesterday, and I looked at the house across the street. And I thought to myself, I wouldn't put dogs in that building. And I came to work, and I dropped off a few things, and then I turned around and I went back home. And I decided to double back through some of those neighborhoods. Here's the thing. You have some absolutely beautiful small homes. These aren't the big McMansions. These are the older homes that have been part of this community since, well, it really began. But why bother on your upkeep and to take care of that home? You'll see 3 or 4 really nice homes where people have actually gone out and they've painted the house. The roofs have been they've been shingled at least once in the last 15 years. Some of them may have some fencing. People have done really hard work at maintaining these properties. So you'll have 3 or 4 of those in a row. And then you get one or several blighted homes. And you're driving down the street and you're thinking, gee, I could live in this neighborhood, but, oh my Lord, what am I looking at? What is the problem with some of these people in these homes and allowing them to fall into such incredible disrepair? I realize that in some parts of the country we are overregulated when it comes to zoning regulations and other requirements. But by golly, if you live in a neighborhood and you have been working hard for the last 30 years to keep your property looking nice, it's just got to be terribly annoying to look around and see some of these places that have fallen beyond. Some of them, I don't know that they could be repaired. Number 2, why are people even living in some of these buildings? Some of them look like they could come collapsing down with any huff and puff. Any strong wind, and that would be the end of it. Can anyone explain to me why there isn't at least more of an effort, at least a public relations effort in this community, for people to do a better job keeping up some of those properties? You know, the ones when you drive by and they're not even using the driveway anymore. Everyone's parking on what used to be lawn, and you've got 2 or 3 vehicles there. You've got garbage piled all over around the garage, in front of the garage, beside the garage. The only thing I haven't seen are a couple of overturned washing machines on the property. I'm waiting for that. I suspect you'll see that in some spots anywhere. But can someone tell me why there is such disregard in some of these neighborhoods? And hasn't there been any efforts by neighbors to just get together and go down the street, tell that homeowner, look, we think you really ought to uphold your end of the bargain, and maybe do a better job of cleaning this area up? For crying out loud, I mean, this can't be all that difficult, can it? You can reach our program today by calling me, Bill Colley, on Top Story. The telephone number is 736-0300. That's 736-0300. Or you can reach me by email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That last name is spelled Colley. And you're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Hey, Bill. It's actually a real simple answer. The people who generally have the nicer homes, and this isn't always the case, they own those homes, whereas a lot of those houses, especially in the old part of town, and I know because my job requires me to work in a lot of them, they're rentals. And so the renters, who generally are maybe lower income, either can't afford to fix it up or just don't care. And that's most of the time, is they just don't care. And interestingly enough, the landowners, the people who own the buildings, don't care. And so they're just getting the money they need out of the building, and apparently don't monitor whether it's going into disrepair or not. But that's why.
Well, I think that it behooves the renter to try to keep a neat atmosphere on their own. And if you're the actual owner of the home, you can, I think, demand that, right? But number 2, if it's your property, the renter isn't really responsible for the new roof or the new siding. You as the property owner.
Yeah, that's just it. The landlords don't care. And a lot of them, people don't realize this, but a lot of them, the people that own these homes, they live in Arizona. They don't even live in the States. They barely ever see the buildings. In my job, I have to get written permission to do certain things on these rental houses from the landlord, and a lot of times they can't even get it because they've never seen the landlord. They hardly ever talk to the landlord. The landlord lives in a different state.
Here's a question. Do you need to get a tetanus shot before you go into some of these places?
I felt like it sometimes. And I think anybody would be surprised to see how many hoarders we have in the area, and it's always sad to see a situation like that. But, generally people who are going to take care of their properties are also going to do what's needed to buy a property.
Well, I have a thought as I was driving by some of these places. It sticks in my mind, and that is, if I had my choice of living in some of those homes or living out in the forest, I'll take the forest.
Except for the winter.
Yeah, it was a mild one, at least. Thank you much for the telephone call. 816, you're listening to Bill Colley this morning. And of course, you can reach us at 736-0300, 736-0300. 50 at our studios, down a degree now since we started the program. I must be cooling things off a little bit with our discussion. We need to make it a hot talk this morning during the course of the program. And you're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and on Top Story.
Yes, if you look around and see some of those houses that you're talking about too, there's a lot of people on Social Security and welfare, and they're just too dang lazy because they get everything handed to them, so they just don't want to put effort into anything because they're so lazy.
Well, and I had a relative one time who we used to joke he hadn't painted his house since 1967. Money was tight in his family for a lot of years, and that may have been the reason why. And I do understand there are people on certain fixed incomes, and that's going to play a role in it. But sheesh, isn't there some way we can at least clean up the yards and maybe just a little bit of paint on some of the walls? You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Yeah, good morning. My friend has a really nice house like you're talking about, and then right next door, the people there, he's called the city about them not cleaning up their property and stuff, and the city said, well, there's nothing we do about it, but they'll come out, and if they find a weed in your yard, they'll fine you for it.
Yeah, it depends on who you are, I guess. It's
yeah.
like, roll of the dice.
See you, Bill.
Hey, thank you much for the telephone call. Well, Rebecca Milsoyko is going to rejoin us on Wednesday in studio, and perhaps there's some questions in all of this for her when she drops by the premises again here coming up in a couple of days. I will say this, all of these new developments going up, and in many cases, and I've seen this happen in other parts of the country too as well, in many cases they end up pushing out a lot of those old homes, and it gives the neighborhood a better look. The other side of that, though, is that you end up pricing a lot of people out of their homes, and they don't really have anywhere to go anymore. So you just push the problem somewhere else. And there always have to be people who have to work certain jobs. I know they'll probably think I'm belittling them when I say menial work. Unskilled labor, how's that? Is that a better way to put it? And they aren't going to make a lot of money. We understand that. But they need to live close to work because they have to be able to get there. Transportation is often an issue for them. And if you keep pushing them out to the margins, then all of a sudden there's nobody left to work in those businesses. I'm cognizant of all of that. But these absentees, as the first caller said, these absentee landlords, some of them who've never even seen their own properties. Hello. Someone's got to hold their feet to the fire, right? At some point? Well, you would think. We have a guest coming up in just a couple of minutes. She's here from the Twin Falls Senior Center. Jeanette Rowe going to be talking with us about a promotion that they've got coming up. And she also has a need for volunteers, always. You might want to tune in if you have some time on your hands where you could actually step up and assist a growing and needy older population in this country. Do it right at home, and it won't cost you anything other than a little bit of time. That's straight ahead at 8:20, 50 at our studios on Top Story with Bill Colley. Jeanette Rowe is joining us in the studio during this segment of the program. I should point out she's been here before. On a few, she knows her way to the radio station better than I do, I think, at this point. She's going to be talking with us in just a moment about some events coming up that probably for some people this time of year. For some of us of a particular, how shall we call it, ancestry, this is a big deal this week. And then the rest of the year, we just figure, well, the rest of you can do whatever you please, but St. Patrick's Day coming up, and there's some tie-in that we'll talk about in just a moment with all of that. It's 8:24, 50 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. And if you're listening online, newsradio1310.com. But then if you're already listening online, you already knew that, right? But if you go anywhere out of town, you can take that along with you. And just to let you know, you have an opportunity to listen to us all around the world. Hey, very quickly, too, I just wanted to remind you about our friends at Western States Bus Services, where they are now hiring part-time school bus drivers. Split shifts 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. Pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. First of all, Jeanette, welcome back.
Thank you.
I was going to say about a month since you've been by, right?
That's correct.
You've got, well, first of all, we were talking about a couple of things they've got going on, but tomorrow being St. Patrick's Day, um, which is more than I guess just an Irish holiday. It has become one of those just fun days that we practice across the country. You've got some things going on with that.
We do. We have a special lunch tomorrow. We will be having corned beef and cabbage. We usually like to participate with the St. Patrick's Day as well. So it'll be at straight up 12 o'clock. If you're 60, it is $5. And if you're under 60, it's $6. And you will end up with a wonderful meal. We're expecting a big crowd tomorrow. Then afterwards, from 2 to 5, if people would like to, after they've had their lunch, they can come down to hands-on, and if they could go down there and just make something, you can take your own bottle with you and just have a little bit more party in it if you would like to do that. And make something fun, whether it's a beer stein or anything else you would like to do, and all those studio fees will be donated to the Twin Falls Senior Center.
Yeah, as you point out, it's a lot going on tomorrow because I think my recollections of St. Patrick's Day, at least the ones I remember, were that it was a very long event. You started early in the morning and you didn't wrap up until much later in the evening. But I was younger then. And this is a little safer than what a lot of these younger folks tend to do on St. Patrick's Day.
We do. And Old Duncan's downtown also has a big celebration, and they have specials. And we've been doing this basically all weekend. They've started the parade on Saturday, and this is just the finale.
I was going to say I went down to the parade and I tested for an Irish event. I tested the calzone at O'Duncan's, and leave it up to an Irish pub to know how to make a great calzone. You have some other things going on this week too, as well. Some of the folks from City Hall getting involved with some of what you're doing too, as well.
Right. This is the week that is what is called the National March on Wheels Week. It is to help bring recognition to the Meals on Wheels programs all across the United States and get people to help understand the importance of those programs all across the United States. And basically, the Twin Falls, what we do is we deliver meals to seniors here in the area. And what we're trying to get people to understand is a lot of people don't realize what services we have. As much as I've been on the radio, they don't realize how their family members can get help or assistance with having meals. So this week, I've got Suzanne Hawkins is going to come today to help us with delivering the meals. Tomorrow on St. Patrick's Day, Mayor Hall will be there. Shauna Wasco from the Office on Aging will be there, and then Rebecca Mills-Soika with the City Council as well will be helping with the delivery of the meals. And then on Wednesday, Greg Lanting will be there, and then on Thursday, I have Sean Berger with the Chamber of Commerce and the City Council, and then County Commissioner Leon Mills will be there. And then somewhere during the week, I've got Miss Magic Valley's Outstanding Teen and the National Miss Sweetheart also coming to participate.
I was going to say, there is always a need for volunteers, and this will really, I think, underscore that need. If people are interested in getting involved, what would you recommend they do?
Basically, they just need to come down to the senior center. They need to give us some applicable information. We need to have a little bit of information from them. They fill out an application. We have to have a driver's license. You do have to be over the age of 18 years of age in order to be able to drive. But if you have a parent come with you, you still can drive. You can still participate in doing that, being under 18. And then we also need a proof of liability insurance.
And maybe, is there a background check as well?
Yes.
And we need to remind people of that. And that's just, in this day and age, a very simple thing to do. It doesn't take very long. And, most people don't have any issue with that. They can pass that.
That's correct. But basically, this is an important service. The seniors that need this service, they're homebound. They're not able to get out into the community. We're part of the lifeline. The people that go to their houses are the people that they get to see on a regular basis. They get familiar with them, and then we're also do like welfare checks on them, make sure that they haven't had a problem or an issue, and in making sure that they get proper nutrition. For every dollar that we spend on the Meals on Wheels program, basically you can spend to feed a senior for an entire year will save 1 day of a hospital bill or 6 days in a nursing home stay. So we feel it's really important to spend those dollars because you could do a lot with those instead of those seniors being in the hospital.
Well, Jeanette Rowe, I'd like to thank you for coming by today. It sounds exciting this week, too, as well. I'm glad we've got people from government who are getting involved in helping promote this, too. And it shows maybe that sometimes we criticize them, but on the other hand, they've got their hearts in the right places. We'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Okay, thank you.
It's 50 at our studios, 8:30 on Top Story. I think we're all aware that as we grow a little older, we have to keep a better track of our health. And a lot of folks are trying to do that even when they're young, and good for them. When was the last time you asked a friend for medical advice? Well, a lot of them are willing to give it, but, the professionals might be the people to turn to, including my friends at Tripp Family Medicine. They're going to be live with me this Wednesday. In fact, they're with us Wednesday mornings at 8:30, between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, discussing issues important to you, and they'll be giving you an opportunity to call in with your questions. So I hope you can join us on Wednesday morning for that half hour. Tune in each Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. for Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine in Twin Falls, across from the post office on Fillmore Street, because life's too short not to feel good. We had a spirited discussion with them last week when we talked about immunizations. This week we'll be looking at perhaps a different topic, but I've heard stories over the last few weeks about friends of mine who are either ailing from cancer or heart issues. Some of them are no longer with us. But the idea is good medical advice can sometimes be the thing that turns your life around, and so we hope to provide some of that. 8:35, Randy Staples will be joining us in just a few minutes following the next break and following the next series of messages from some of our fine sponsors. It's 50 on Top Story with Bill Colley, and you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as online at newsradio1310.com. As many of you know, I have a background in news media. I worked as a reporter and then later as a news manager. I was a television news director for a number of years at a series of different television stations throughout the Northeast and New England. And I got out of that line of work. And in fact, at one time I'd been in radio news, before that even briefly at a newspaper. Got out of that line of work altogether because I just felt things had moved beyond giving the straight facts, reporting the news, into telling people what they should think and trying to convince people to become with you an advocate for a particular cause that they may not agree with. And then if they don't agree with you, you go out and you demonize their worldview, call them haters or bigots and the like. You understand what I'm talking about. We've all seen how this works in current modern media. I saw a story at the Associated Press today. This is on the AP Wire. And this is one of my constant beefs with establishment media. And this is coming out of Las Vegas, Nevada. And this is the lead. A Navy veteran who served in Iraq has been indicted on a murder charge in the beating death of a neighbor in Las Vegas. What does being a Navy veteran have to do with the crime? Are they trying to imply that if people are veterans, especially veterans of the Iraqi or Afghanistan wars, that they somehow have a greater predisposition to coming home and killing neighbors in arguments? Is that the goal? Is that evidence that the media really has disdain for people who actually put on a uniform and serve this country, or actually go into a combat zone for this country? What if the guy had been a bread delivery man? Would we hear a bread delivery man who has taken bread all over Nevada and parts of California and Utah has been charged with killing his neighbor? Or what if he'd been at one time a really good high school baseball player? Would the lead story be a man who was a really good outfielder in high school has been charged with killing a neighbor? Why is it relevant that he served in Iraq? Why is that even in the first sentence? Why is that the lead in this story? What are they trying to do in the back of your mind, subconsciously, when they do this with a story? It mentions he's accused of repeatedly punching a neighbor in the face in the parking lot of Hampton Court Apartments, and the neighbor then died months later. In fact, almost 8 to 9 months later. And it says KLS-TV of Las Vegas reports that the neighbor lived with his fiancée and her children in an upstairs unit, and the veteran lived below. Prosecutors say that the veteran had complained that children were too noisy. Look, I don't know about you, but every time I see these stories, I want to pick up the telephone and I want to call the reporters. I want to call the Associated Press, the editors, the news directors, who's ever responsible for anything like this, and just simply try to ask them, do you really believe that the guy's service in the military had anything to do with this? Now, we may have a handful of people who come back with what is known as post-traumatic stress disorder, and that may impact their dealings with neighbors. And sometimes that could end up being a fairly tragic consequence or situation if it happens. But to sit here and try to explain this, you're trying to give in media the impression, I know what you're up to, that everybody who has served at war is somehow drooling and ready to kill when they come home. And next time you see one of those people on the street with their notepad and their pen or pencil, why don't you just stop and ask them when they're going to stop? When they are going to try and tell the story without having to paint anyone in the military as some sort of badass. Because I am sick to death of it. And maybe it's time that we started taking away their pads and their pencils if they can't behave themselves and just give us straight facts on a story without trying to convince us to adopt their worldview. Randy Staple is coming up in just a few minutes from the Idaho Weekly Briefing. Going to be talking with us about, well, it looked like we might have a big roads bill coming in the state capitol. Apparently not. It looked like we might be having teacher raises coming throughout Idaho. Apparently not. Lots of things have changed as the legislative session drags on and nears an end. More details coming up. It's 8:40. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. 51 at our studios this morning. As many of you know, in less than 2 weeks, the legislative session is supposed to be coming to an end in Boise. It may not. There may be a lot of work that still needs to be completed before that March 27th deadline that may have to be, they may have to find some other way to handle that. 51 at our studios, 8:44 on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I am your host, Bill Colley. And at this time on Monday mornings, we are joined by the publisher of the Idaho Weekly Briefing, that is Randy Staples. And, of course, he's got a lot of experience keeping an eye on state government, and he has been looking over some of the, well, when the session started, there were a lot of hopes that we would see raises for teachers in order to better retain and recruit teachers, talented teachers, as well as finally settling a long-term dispute, almost a decade old, about how we're going to fund road repairs, bridge repairs, and the like going into the future. Randy, first of all, welcome back to the program.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
It didn't take long for some of these great dreams about teacher salaries and road repairs to come crashing down, did it?
Well, it's probably going to be the fight of the end of the session. They at the end of the session they always have what they call going home bills. That this will be the particular piece of legislation that will settle the big issue that's at hand and will allow them to adjourn. And it was pretty clear to me from the beginning of the session that you were going to be looking at the roads at the very least as a going home kind of issue, and possibly teacher salaries as well. I thought there was the possibility that might be compromised away in some way earlier on in the session, but it's still kind of a live debate. Both of those things are, and they could wind up stretching the session out for a while. Those I think the dreams that the legislative leadership had of being able to go home at the end of next week, which is what they were talking about for quite some time, that's kind of going away now. And it's getting into the sides are digging in a little bit more.
Is it a situation where leadership and then the Republican leadership seem to be willing to finally come together on some of these issues? Is it a situation that it's almost a mirror image maybe of what we're seeing in Washington, where a lot of the backbenchers, the people who've come to the legislature in recent years, they come from a political view that is much more. Conservative is probably an understatement in it, but they just look at the size of government and spending, and to borrow what was it, Roberto Duran's word, no mas, or his words, no mas.
Yeah, it's there's some of that. It's a very anti-spending, anti-tax group that's really pretty dominant both in the Idaho Senate and in the Idaho House. That's one of the things that's a little bit different in this term and the last term from most previous sessions. Most of the time before, there was a little bit more of a distinction between how the Idaho House and how the Idaho Senate felt about those things. Usually, the Idaho Senate would be a little bit less anti than the House would be, but now both chambers pretty much are that way. They both pretty much are in opposition to much additional spending, and certainly to anything there that looks like a tax increase. And that's where both of these things kind of hit the rocks, because you do have legislators who are calling very strongly for teacher pay increases. The head of the Senate Tax Committee has, from the beginning of the session, been calling for that, and it's been his call for it has been something that's come up repeatedly, as in the even in the big sort of scandal of the last couple of weeks, when the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry president has kind of been called out on the carpet for some of the comments that he made on that subject. So that's been going on. And then on the highway side, the governor has certainly been pushing very hard for some kind of an increase. But he's essentially said, I want an increase, I want additional spending on this, but I'm not going to insist on a particular way of doing it. And since there's not much agreement on a particular way of doing it, he may be left with not very much unless he comes up with a specific package that he's willing to really kind of put some muscle behind.
Does he have the muscle, the political muscle, left in the state?
Well, that's a real good question, and I think probably the prevailing view would be that he does not. Yeah, even a governor under very good positions with very strong support has a difficult time pushing through something like that. And something like this has been a big fight for Otter in the past. For at least one of his predecessors, Dirk Kempthorne, got into a very, very long-range battle with legislators years ago on exactly this kind of subject. And it's a tough one. It's a very tough one. And I think if there is one subject that really could, if the governor insists, draw out the length of the session, it could be highway spending.
Our guest is Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing. It's coming up on 8:51 at our studios. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com online. And I am your host, Bill Colley. Randy, when we talk a little bit about the fact that the governor may not get a lot of respect from people in the halls of the legislature, you've also got to realize all of those committee chairs and even the leadership in this day and age don't seem to be getting any as well. And in a sense, how can you be a leader if no one backs you up?
Well, that's true. That's certainly true. And it's one of those things, one of those curious things at the State House. And I'm sure you've seen this in other places too. There's the State House is kind of what I call an echo chamber. The people inside it tend to think that they're much better, that they and what they say and what they do are much better known outside the State House than they actually are. Most people around the state really don't know who many of the legislative players are. And I think there's a sense that there is more support or more opposition for various things around the state than there tends to actually be. And so when they kind of go looking for that, when they go looking around the state for some kind of serious backup for whatever their position is, they often don't find that there's as much of it as they would like unless there's some large organization that's already there.
You bring up a point, and I was talking with my sister over the weekend who lives in western New York State, and she's a school teacher, and she was venting about Andrew Cuomo, who happens to be her governor, and I finally pointed out, I said, Andrew Cuomo and 150 legislators, you have to forget he's part of a team, or you have to remember he's part of a team. And of course, the governor is the one, I think, in most states who takes most of the heat. And so you can have people stonewalling a governor for through perpetuity, I guess, because they know that in some cases that's where the buck stops, and they don't really have to worry about that.
That's right, and the governor tends to get, I think any governor of any state, most all the time, tends to get more credit and more blame, both, than they really deserve, because they're the name that most people know. if something good happens, something bad happens, that's the name that tends to come to mind. And you're right, it is partly a partnership in a way between the governor and the legislature, and occasionally it can be a kind of a partnership with the Supreme Court when when the Supreme Court gets into real policy areas, which happens from time to time.
We are seeing on the national level a lot of what you'd call mirror images of all of this, because you have battles going on between the White House and then members of Congress, and that they're fighting over the various powers, and yet right inside various camps, you can't get agreement. And you mentioned this morning a column by Mike Simpson over the weekend where the congressman was just venting. I mean, and it wasn't what I'd call a polite column, venting about his fellow Republicans who he feels have become obstructionists.
This is a topic that he's not really shied away from before, but I thought it was kind of a remarkable column because it was not just a side comment. It was very much his specific comment that a significant group of people in his own caucus are simply being obstructionist, and that comes close to almost sounding like a declaration of war, especially when you consider that although he didn't say it in the column, I think most people would realize that those people in the opposition may very well include the other Idaho House member from that's in the caucus, Raul Labrador. They've butted heads from time to time. And so this really it puts him on record in kind of an official way, as opposed to just a campaign way, about where he is at and how he sees what the Republican role is and ought to be.
I was going to say that it's reminiscent. I saw the remake just a couple of years ago of Mutiny on the Bounty with Anthony Hopkins, of course, playing Captain Bligh, and you have a look here that is probably developing in government, if I could maybe make an analogy, where you're going to have the Speaker of the House put out on the boat with his few supporters and told toodaloo and sent off to wherever they end up, while the rest of the ship takes off and heads in another direction. It's starting to resemble that.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like that at times. Of course, it all depends on who has the numbers. And in the movie, in the story, that was the way that wound up going. In the case of the U.S. House, the insurgents' numbers aren't quite there yet. They're as Simpson pointed out, they're still in the minority. But who knows whether they may grow? There's a big battle that's been going on in exactly that area for the last few years, and that will probably be continuing in the next few elections.
Well, you mentioned a couple of weeks ago that Congressman Labrador's popularity has not subsided with his base, and it almost struck me that Simpson is taking a terrible gamble here if he tends to annoy, because I'm sure that the people in eastern Idaho are a lot like the people in western Idaho, and he could be upsetting a lot of people within his own party who may be thinking it's time for him to go.
Well, it's a direct shot in a way at the challenges that have come up to him. He's been significantly challenged in the last three primaries, and he was very seriously challenged in the last one, but he prevailed each time against candidates from kind of the Labrador wing of the party. And I think that he may be taking the attitude at this point that I am in the majority position in my party, in my district, and I can do this. I can take on this opposition, and I think he may have come to the conclusion that it would be as well to not wait until campaign season to do that, but to go right after him early on and to make his case for why voters in his district need to support him rather than one of the opponents before traction really begins again.
I think you could say that even though if you may not agree with him as a Republican, he's taken a fairly courageous stand.
It's a pretty strong one. He's not. There are a lot of Republicans who are kind of in the position that he's in. Around the Northwest, most of the Republicans in the U.S. House are kind of positioned where Mike Simpson is. but I can't think of any of them that in this cycle, at least in this term, have taken the kind of flat out, very clear stand in opposition to to the opposition that Simpson has.
Randy, for people who'd like to take a look at the weekly briefing, where would you send them?
I would send them to www.ridenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH.
We've got a few seconds left. Any big predictions for the next week?
Well, I think the legislature is going to be, by the end of this week, I think it will probably be narrowing down to the last few issues, which do look to get into the subjects of teacher pay and highway funding. And you'll probably be able to see toward the end of this week who really has the numbers in those areas.
Super. Well, we look forward to talking to you again next Monday morning.
We'll talk to you then.
Take care, sir. Randy Staples joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, which means you can hear us anywhere around the world online. Bill Colley with you on Top Story for one more hour. In the meantime, Fox News is coming up next at 9 o'clock. Yeah, 9 o'clock. My clock in the studio, I don't know what happened. Somebody over the weekend may have been trying to, how shall we say, adjust it. It had not been adjusted when we moved to daylight savings time. So it's been reading perpetually all morning long, 10 minutes of 11. Figure that one out. News is next. One more hour of the program ahead, just as well. A new study says if you're being nice to women and you're a man, you're a sexist. I just want to let you know that if that's the case, then I'm not one. 9:07:51 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX. This is Top Story. And, of course, you can listen to us anywhere online all around the world on newsradio1310.com. That is our website. You go there, you just click on the Listen Live icon. So if you're going out of town and you don't want to miss anything, there's your opportunity. I'm going to mention something about that study in just a few minutes, but in the meantime, could I just briefly interject this? This came from the Daily Caller over the weekend. Ferguson shooting suspect from protests. Now, if you've been anywhere other than living under a rock the last few days, you know that there has been an arrest made in the shooting of 2 police officers in Ferguson, Missouri last Thursday night during a protest. And the officers were shot by someone in the crowd at the demonstration. Meanwhile, media and many people involved with the protests are now saying, whoa, wait a minute, this guy was not even part of our demonstration. Okay, he was there with the demonstration, sure. He was standing with the other demonstrators and shouting at the police, sure. But no, he didn't have his membership card with him. The latest story this morning, the latest update on all of this is that the guy was shooting at someone else and the police officers who were standing a couple hundred feet away, standing on a corner, wherever they happened to be, minding their own business, were both shot as he was shooting at someone else. Don't know who else he was shooting at. And it could be that he got into a dispute with somebody else. Could be that he's a gang member who saw someone from another rival gang and they were both there demonstrating and decided that, hey, they could not put away their old animosities, so they were going to start shooting at each other while they were there for the same cause. I can see that as an explanation. However, when I was reading this story, and this is the last paragraph, as such, protest leaders and reporters scrambled to contain the narrative and shift attention back to the report the Justice Department released claiming racism is rampant in the Ferguson Police Department. I've mentioned it before. If you listen to the show with any regularity, you know that I have been to a lot of what you call Tea Party rallies. I was at the big one in 2009 where we had 1.5 million people on the lawn of the nation's capital. I went back a year later for the Glenn Beck rally at the Lincoln Memorial where we had about 600,000 people. And then 2 weeks later, I went back for another Tea Party rally. It was not as big as the one in 2009, but we still probably turned out a couple of 100,000 people. A lot of people couldn't afford to do both Glenn Beck and the Tea Party 2 weeks apart. Those bus trips from Georgia and Idaho and Nevada are expensive, you realize. So people had to split the difference the second year. And then I went back following that, the following March, for the discussion. Michelle Bachmann had invited a lot of us to come back and demonstrate against the adoption of Obamacare, and I was there that weekend as part of the demonstration outside. And I have been to a lot of local Tea Party demonstrations. I have been to statewide Tea Party demonstrations, regional demonstrations. One time, a friend of mine and we got into a car early in the morning. We drove all the way to Scranton, Pennsylvania. We even saw that big statue you used to see at the beginning of The Office, with a statue of the woman out there. What is she holding, a sword or something like that? We went to a Tea Party rally there, got to hear the band Madison Rising. Wonderful, by the way, entertainers. Then we got back in the car, and we drove all the way back home from Scranton, Pennsylvania. So I am familiar with how these things work, and I have been a part of them for a very long time. And I'm going to tell you the overwhelming majority of the people who attend these, they're the people who own the hardware store on Main Street, or they're the local accountant, or they're the dairy farmer who managed to finally get away after 30 years and find someone else to do his milking for him so he could go to a rally. They're just your average middle Americans. Richard Nixon called them the silent majority. Nothing has changed. But I remember being at one of these rallies. We had about 1,500 people at one of these rallies many, many years ago, and I was the master of ceremonies. And the next day I went looking for newspaper coverage just to see if we'd gotten any. My experience had been, if you have six old hippies standing outside a government building holding up signs for the Occupy demonstration, that was usually front page news. If you had 1,500 people out for a Tea Party rally, that was usually on page A16 or somewhere in the B section, or on the back page of the B section or C section. C section is a different issue. Yeah, we're not talking about pregnancies. However, I picked up the newspapers the following day, and there was nary a mention of this rally that had taken place, and I grabbed two newspapers that I thought would have covered it. And finally, in the second newspaper, I got to page A8, I believe it was, and there was a small story about 2 paragraphs long, and there was a photograph of some guy, and he had a sign that said, "I'm an American citizen. Are you Mr. Obama?" In other words, he was a birther, as they're called. And the newspaper decided to take his picture and use that to illustrate all 1,500 people at that event. So you realize if somebody at a Tea Party rally pulled out a gun and fired a couple of shots, media would be saying, "There you go, we've told you these people are dangerous, they are violent, and they are bloodthirsty killers." That's what media would be telling you. And I know from my own experience that sometimes the left-planted people at Tea Party rallies, we caught a few of them in Washington one year on the march. And I ended up chasing one of them off, much to the applause of a couple of hundred people around me, so that they could try to discredit what we were doing, so they could claim that we were all that way. But you see, you get one hoodlum in Ferguson, Missouri, he shoots 2 police officers, and now we're told, well, but he doesn't represent what's going on there. It's 9:13. We have a caller with us, 51 at our studios, and you're up next on News Radio 1310 KLIX and Top Story.
Hey, Bill. I'm kind of glad to see that you're getting around our nice area and seeing some sights. I saw that on Facebook. But my comment is, I heard over last week was, do you know how do you win an argument with a liberal?
What's that?
Hold a mirror up and let them see themselves. Because every time they scream and rant, racist, they're the ones that are bringing it up, not us. If we say that we don't like somebody's policies, we didn't say we didn't like the person. We said we didn't like the policies. They're the ones screaming racist.
Yeah, they're so condescending. They will go around and they will tell, if they meet, for instance, someone who's a conservative black person, they'll tell them, that you're working for the man and that, you're just an Uncle Tom, etc. That is a very condescending attitude, and that is about as racist as you can get. But they don't see it that way.
No, they don't. I mean, just last week, somebody took the place of one of the talk show hosts, and a liberal guy called in and was just accusing him of everything in the book that they do themselves, changing the subject, bringing things up from the past, blah, blah, blah. Oh, will you stop doing that? How come you're doing that? But yet that's what they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I say all the time, if a liberal says something that's going on, look really close, because one of them are doing it and they're trying to deflect.
Yeah, I thank you much for the call. Projection was what it was called in a psychology course I took years ago. that you tend to project many of your own character flaws onto someone else when you're arguing with them. First of all, if you hold a mirror up to a liberal, they're going to get it all steamy because of all the shouting and the anger and their blood pressure going sky high. That will cause some issues there with the mirror. They might break it too. Well, maybe Hillary. But for the rest of you out there, you've got to realize liberals make these arguments because they think they are the smartest people in any argument, in any room they walk into, any classroom, any party. This is the nature. And I mentioned it quickly last week with that argument. There's more arguments going on right now. ACLU has joined in the fight to protect the Washington Redskins trademark. I know it seems kind of strange that the ACLU would be doing that. Although the ACLU did issue a statement that's saying, well, it's mean and hurtful speech too, but here's the thing. When liberals go around and tell you you can't have a name like Redskins, or North Dakota, they told them you could no longer be called the Fighting Sioux. That was the University of North Dakota Fighting Sioux. And they argued that this was wrong and it was hurtful and it was mean and it was racist, it was prejudiced. And yet the Sioux in North Dakota said, no, wait a minute here. We want the team to be called the Fighting Sioux. First of all, they're successful. That's a good thing. So there's success, and that reflects on us as a tribe. And the university, which is peopled mainly by a lot of white liberals, communists, Marxist, Leninists, came back and said, no, you don't understand. You're being insulted. And the tribe said, no, we're not being insulted. No, you're not bright enough to understand it. We white liberals are really smart, and obviously you Indians aren't nearly as smart as we are. It must be those small craniums you have, because we white liberals have really big craniums and really large brains. Don't you see the insult in that? Don't you see the condescension to the Sioux nations when they're told, no, you're all wrong, you can't have this name? Or that 92% of Indians surveyed don't have a problem with Washington Redskins. And you've got various Navajo schools where the students are known as the Redskins, and they're proud of it. Or in Florida, where they're called the Florida State, the Seminoles. The Seminole Nation fought the argument from the liberals there. And in one of those rare cases, the Seminoles actually won. So the team is still called the Florida State Seminoles because the tribe said they are honoring us. And I brought it up last week. No one ever said the term Redskins was racist until just a few years ago. And then liberals tried to invent, I saw one on MSDNC one day. Don't ask me why I was watching it. Apparently every other channel was busted. And this liberal professor was saying, well, it became a racial epithet back in the middle of the last century. Huh? When? How? Where? Well, it did, yeah, in media and among mean people. So what happened? Before that, it was not a racial epithet. No, it wasn't. Well, then how did it become one? Because I thought it should be one. And people like me decided it would be one. That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the condescension of people out there who can't buckle their own shoes, who are trying to tell the rest of us how we've got to live our lives. And that we have to follow everything that they do. I'm sorry. I'm just not listening any longer. They are pushing the envelope here, trying to start World War III. I mean, it's a civil war in this country. And you know something? They're so dang afraid of ammunition and firearms, they couldn't possibly win. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story at 9:18.
But what infuriates me all about that is they don't ever bring up how the name came to be. The original coach was Indian.
Right. And the team was also from Boston originally, where, of course, the Boston Tea Party had all tied in.
Yeah, so, I mean, the name was put in place to honor him. He had no offense to it. And if you talk to a lot of the Indian people, they don't have offense to it. It is a small group. Again, here we go with the liberal deals. The smallest person complaining is the one that we all have to change for.
Yes. Hey, thank you much for the call. You get one Ward Churchill out there, and all of a sudden, everybody has to respond to that. First of all, there's no law against people getting their feelings hurt, despite what the liberals would like to institute. Let's stop. We don't have to call them liberals all the time. I don't want to call them progressives, though, because there's nothing progressive about what they do. That would imply progress. So I don't know, filthy, dirty hippies or skanky communists, whatever you like, you throw one out there. I think it's appropriate. I've got more coming up. Hey, I want to tell you that if you're nice to women and you're a man, you're sexist, according to one university study. It's 51 at our studios at 920. I want to remind you again this morning, if you have someone in the family who's looking for a little part-time work and that could supplement your household income, our friends at Western States Bus Services are hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts 5 days per week. Of course, you get summers off and scheduled no school days. That's a nice way to say snow days, which we didn't see a lot of, apparently. Pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. That number, 733-8003. Western States Bus Services, an equal opportunity employer. So I came across this at National Review this morning. Yes, if there is more evidence that the left is completely out of its gourd, collective gourd. Well, they're only using one, right? National Review, study, being nice to women is a sign of sexism. That's the headline. The writer is a woman named Catherine Timpf. If you're a man who smiles at a woman and makes an effort to be kind, you're probably, and this is a quote, insidious, unquote, and quote, treacherous, unquote, sexist, according to a study conducted by researchers from Northeastern University in Boston. That's in the People's Republic of Massachusetts. After observing 27 people playing Trivial Pursuit, the researchers determined that these kinds of behaviors, previously known as chivalry, were actually signs of what's called, quote, benevolent sexism, unquote. All right. In other words, men, she writes, who think that women deserve to be treated well often also think that women should be treated particularly well because they're women. This, the researchers explain, perpetuates gender inequality. All right. So, if you go around slapping women all the time, I guess that's what they'd approve of. The writer goes on to say offering your jacket to a shivering woman isn't helping her. It's hurting her by perpetuating the patriarchal idea that a woman is more likely to be cold than you are just because she's a woman. So, guys, you don't have to open the doors for them any longer. Think about that. Think about all the great possibilities it opens up for all of us. The writer says that by actually liking the fact that men in her life do these things, she is considered oppressed. She goes on to write, according to another one of the researchers, what's wrong is that I actually don't want those things for myself. I'm just too mesmerized by the tricks of benevolent sexists to realize that the chivalrous treatment I think I enjoy is actually oppressing me. Yeah, and you know what? They probably got a grant, taxpayer-funded grant, to watch people play Trivial Pursuit and then write this up. 926 on Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and you're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. This is Pat.
Yes.
I'm not a real young person anymore. I'd like to think I am, but my mother taught me to be a gentleman in my youth, and I respect all women. I don't care if they're large, skinny, ugly, whatever. They all get the same respect, and from a little girl all the way up to a woman, they're always treated with great respect. And I don't see it where that's sexist. I think that's just putting womanhood where it belongs.
My mom, and you mentioned your mother doing that, because my mom was probably more important in raising me in the same way than my father was. Now, my dad would have said the same things, but it was my mom who absolutely emphasized that I be polite to women when I meet them, whether at the grocery store or on the street or in any of my dealings with them, school and then later work.
I think that's the way we were raised back in those days, and I think that's what we're missing now in the raising of the children today. I do not see the respect that we gave to anybody by the children of today's standards.
Yeah, today it's all yep, nope, and nothing beyond that, and a lot of expectations. Thank you much for the call. It's 928. Maybe our mothers were in on it. Maybe our mothers were raising us to be sexists as a means to get back at us because we were born boys. I think if they just gave me a couple more $1 million at Boston University or Northeastern University in Boston, I could figure that one out. Then I could go and I could watch a few more matches of Trivial Pursuit. And during the course of Trivial Pursuit, I could sit there and collect the government money, well, that would be your taxpayer money, and determine whether or not women are actually doing that because of certain envy they have because I have something they don't. But this being a family show, I'm not going to say what it is. 9:28. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. Is there a moment where we can put some sanity back into this culture and where we could just simply go to these fools at these universities and say, no more money from taxpayers? I refuse. The liberals used to argue, and I don't want to keep overusing that word, but gee willikers. They used to argue back during the Vietnam War, and then some of them did it even during the war in Iraq in the last decade, that they were not going to pay a war tax. What they were doing is when they were filling out their tax forms, they were withholding certain amounts and claiming that was an objection. I don't know, maybe they're all in prison now for doing it. How about the rest of us simply say we're not going to pay any more taxes for any more of these ridiculous studies so we can watch people play board games and determine that some are sexist because they're polite, or shrimp on treadmills, some of the other ridiculous things your tax dollars have funded. Yeah, go ahead and try it. Do a knock at the door. Hi, I'm from the IRS. Would you prefer to be nailed to a cross, or do you just prefer boiling oil? We have 9:30. Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. 52 now at our studios. Hey, I've got more coming up. Some of you could be seeing your health insurance canceled. This is another one of those offshoots of Obamacare, but remember, it'll be good for you. Most of us, if we're working, we have employer-provided health insurance. Some of you may have a spouse who's got a better deal and you were able to get on that, and nothing wrong with any of that. And obviously, periodically, we need it too. I've got a coworker who's got a nasty, nasty cold. His name is, I won't say it's Benito. In fact, at church yesterday, he was so worried about having to shake hands during the greeting that he went and stood in the back. So he was being rather standoffish, people may have thought, but it was actually because he was trying to be conscientious and not give his cold to anyone else. Of course, he could have stayed home, but then he would have been excommunicated. So he decided to go to Mass because if Father Mike had not seen him there, Benito would have been on the slow road to hell today. But he didn't give his cold to anyone else that I'm aware of. So, you know, you got to respect a guy like that. That's a good Christian thing to do. He was thinking about others. I had a woman who was in front of me, though, in my pew. She was in the pew directly ahead of me, and she was hacking and sneezing and blowing her nose. And then during the Our Father, she reached all the way down her pew. There were a couple who were on the other end. And some people hold hands when they do that. A friend of mine once joked, he said, this whole business with the hands is part of AA and not necessarily church, meaning Alcoholics Anonymous. But I'm not going to judge anyone on that either. So she held hands with this guy after she'd been all over herself and her hands. And then right after the Our Father, we have the greeting. So I turned around and actually took my time shaking hands with the people in the pew behind me. And then I turned and I shook hands with the people in the pews beside me, thinking that the people ahead of me would, by the time I turned around, have forgotten me. And I turned around, and the guy who'd been holding her germ-stained hands, he reached out and shook my hand. And then she turned around and reached out and extended a hand. And there was a moment there, you're really questioning yourself. Would it be unchristian to say, hey, I don't want your cold? Because I don't think it's very nice to sit there and, being a germ box, try to spread it to everyone else who's sitting around you. But I shook her hand. I did. I thought I better do it because, life is short and you never know when you're going to drop dead. And when you get to the pearly gates and they say, well, you were kind of mean to that woman not shaking her hands. It's not like she had Ebola. She's just got a cold, right? So I shook her hand and then I sat back down. And I noticed she reached in her purse and she took out hand sanitizer and she wiped her hands down after shaking my hand. Now, I wasn't the one sitting there all over everybody else. But after shaking my hand, she decides she needs hand sanitizer. So she wiped her hands down with a hand sanitizer. And then she immediately went all over her hands a second time. So I had to get up for communion. And I was holding my right hand down at my side because I figured that was the one that was germ-stained. And I went up and I got communion in my left palm. And then, I'm not being a left-handed guy, this is a little difficult. I popped it into my mouth, left-handed. It was very awkward. And then I went back to my seat, still holding my right hand down at my side, because in the course of a day, a human being can touch their eyes or their nose or their mouth thousands of times without even realizing it. And if you've already got your hand covered in germs, that's how you're going to pick up somebody else's cold. So I did that all the way until the very end. And then there's a real chatty usher, too, by the way. He came by and shook my hand. And because, it's a referential place, so he wants to go around talking with everybody and socialize. He touched my hand, so he likely spread it to another, a couple hundred people. But I went to the bathroom immediately after the service and washed my hands, and hopefully I didn't touch my eyes or my nose or my mouth, and I'm not going to come down with the same cold. I bring this up because people in Colorado who may be coming down with a cold may have to pay a lot of money to go see a doctor. This is from the Washington Times. Valerie Richardson, nearly 200,000 Coloradans face Obamacare cancellations by 2016. We were told this was going to be the most wonderful thing for America. First of all, we still have millions of uninsured, tens of millions of uninsured, and now you've got people who are it's the Alinskyite model. They're trying to crash the system so they can go to what is single payer. That is a national health care system where we will overtax everyone and then through the normal government efficiency provide really low quality care to everyone after they've all had to get on board the government policy, rationing and the like, and death panels and all of that. It's 9:38. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The writer says those holding non-compliant healthcare policies will have 90 days notice to switch plans. Now, that's just one state. What's going to happen everywhere else? All right, so maybe Idaho's not quite as crowded. We don't have a Denver. So maybe it's not quite as crowded, so maybe we'll only have 100,000 people lose their policies. Washington State will probably have a couple of million. Oregon will probably have 1 million. California will probably have 15 million. This is just, it's obscene what's going on here. And yet, we've been told this is going to be really good for us. Stephen Dinan, also writing in the Washington Times, says Obamacare exchange customers could see a significant spike in their premiums over the next few years as insurers face pressures from both the government and the marketplace. That comes from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office in an analysis that they were doing. By 2020, about 23 million Americans will be using the exchanges and 17 million will be getting government help. Oh, well, the government's got all sorts of money, right? It's that government surplus we have at an average tax payment of $5,070. Well, it was a great country. We've got more on the way. Bill Colley with you. I'm going to wrap up in just a few minutes. 52 at our studios, 940 at KLIX. Apparently, according to what I've been reading the last week, Americans no longer are watching television. Well, okay, some still are, but soon you may be in a minority. Years ago, I was watching an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and they found these people who had been kept in stasis, cryogenically frozen, and they were revived. The episode was about how these people had to try and adjust to life several hundred years in the future, and one of them was an old musician and a cowboy, and he asked Mr. Data, "Hey, what's on the boob tube?" In other words, got to see some shows. And Data says, "Oh, you're talking about television. That form of entertainment subsided in the middle of the 21st century. And again, I thought it's funny, but what would supplant television?" This was back in the early 1990s. Well, technology has really moved rapidly. According to Claire Atkinson at the New York Post, overall primetime broadcast network ratings were off 12% last month compared to a year ago, while cable networks dropped 11%, according to a report. This is the fifth straight month of these huge declines in television viewing. Americans are increasingly watching TV shows on Netflix, Hulu, Amazon streaming, and other services. Some 40% of households now have the subscription video service, Nielsen reported earlier this week. There's not enough yet, though. When I had DirecTV, and I could have 500, of course you can't pick everything you want. You've got to Well, if you pick this tier and give me an arm and a leg, you can have a couple of shows you want to watch, and then 50 you don't. But I had a lot of choices. I had hundreds and hundreds of channels. I'm not aware yet that Netflix, the only thing I really would care to see on Netflix would be that House of Cards show. But I don't think that I have any interest whatsoever in watching a lot of teenage comedies, which is what most of what they provide. Hulu shows you a lot of old reruns. I've seen Green Acres already. It's 9:46. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get by with the change, because with television going away, if all I have to watch are a few movies with a lot of people picking their noses and telling gross jokes, I'm not interested. I may have to take up reading. You can reach the program today, me, Bill Colley, too, as well, by calling 736-0300. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX, also newsradio1310.com, and you're on the air.
Hey, long time no hear from you.
Yes?
Anyway, this Obamacare, it's just going to go away, and the Republicans said they will provide a stopgap so that people won't, if the court trashes it, that it isn't going away.
Well, and I've got an even better solution. Thanks for the call. Ron Paul used to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives. In fact, not consecutively, but he did two different stretches. You may remember him. He's the father of Rand Paul, Republican, but still famous libertarian, has said there's an excellent, if you go to YouTube, you can find an excellent 7-minute video of former Congressman Ron Paul explaining how we can solve this whole so-called healthcare crisis. First of all, if there is a crisis, when you figure the number of people, there's nobody who's uninsured, folks. If you go to the hospital and you don't have your own policy, they're not going to say, go away. I'm bleeding from my carotid artery. Go away. It's not going to happen. So they already are prepared through all of these other government programs, which are poorly administered, to take care of you. Poorly, but still to take care of you. But the fact of the matter is, before we got into HMOs, those were promoted by Richard Nixon, who was a fairly liberal Republican president. Those were promoted by him in the early 1970s. That's what really started messing up health care in this country. Health maintenance organizations. Yes, a very Orwellian name. Prior to that, most people had indemnity plans. That is, you would expect that you would pay $25 or $50 when you went in to see the doctor. Health insurance was for something catastrophic. And it worked. People had to come up with some money out of their own pockets at times, yes, but it worked. And the other part of this is, if we ran car insurance like you run your health insurance, then we would be insured for oil changes. But we're not. You know, your car insurance is for a catastrophic event that you might not otherwise be able to afford, such as someone running into you head on. Or, driving off a bridge somewhere and down into a canyon. Well, you might need some health insurance, too, if that happens. But here we go. We've got this system built for every little sniffle you have. You'd like to go to the doctor and get it taken care of and not have to pay anything for it. Car insurance doesn't work that way. Your homeowner's policy doesn't work that way. Why should health insurance work that way? Maybe Ron Paul is onto something. If we go back to that old system, which existed just a little over 40 years ago in this country, maybe the problem would work itself out. Or how about competition across state lines? Most states have limits or, restrictions on who you can buy your insurance from. Some have just as few as 2 carriers. Well, if I had 200 to choose from, I might get a much better deal. 9:49. The Huckabee Report is coming up. It's brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. Telephone number 736-6563. Once again, Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number 736-6563. Mike Huckabee, and then a few closing thoughts, too, as well, coming up on the program this morning. I have a couple of other things I'd like to mention if I just very quickly could. And then I've got to get out of this building because I have to go meet a delivery truck. But God willing and the creek don't rise. I'm going to say that now in case I don't get to it later. I'll be back here tomorrow between 8 and 10 o'clock. And thank you very much, Governor Huckabee. 9:54:53 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Coming up in just a few minutes, Rush Limbaugh following news from Fox at 10 o'clock. Sean Hannity following news from Fox at 1 o'clock, and Glenn Beck scheduled following the news at 4 o'clock. The news from Fox, of course, all day long at the top of each hour. There is a story I just wanted to quickly mention before we wrapped up today. I'm hopeful that my name's going to be on the list. Remember Art Buchwald? He was a humor columnist. He wrote back in the 1960s and 70s. I think in the 80s, too. Ended up dying some years ago, but he was one of Washington's best-known humor columnists. But he couldn't make it to Nixon's enemies list. And he was disappointed because he thought that he yanked the president's chain so often. But the president apparently liked the humor in the column, and so they never put him on the enemies list. That was a list of people, of course, in media who they just didn't like. Well, hey, I mean, I don't blame them. They were dealing with media. There are probably a lot of people presidents don't like and other people in government. But, in fact, some of us in media don't like people in media. Glenn Greenwald, who is the partner of Edward Snowden. Snowden is the fellow who walked away with all of the records from the National Security Administration, just stacks and stacks of records if they were paper. They're not. They're electronic mainly. Glenn Greenwald was the reporter who was working in conjunction with him to spread around the world and let people know exactly what... Some of this stuff may have been appropriate to share with the rest of the world, especially when it came to the NSA and domestic spying. On the other hand, they've also shared some things that have greatly endangered the United States. So they weren't very judicious about what they did. But according to Cheryl K. Chumley at the Washington Times, Cheryl is a Facebook and LinkedIn friend, she writes that Glenn Greenwald is going to publish a list of U.S. citizens that the NSA spied on. I'd like to be on that list, just for some street cred. I got to be honest about that. So if it pops up that I said something on the radio at some point over the last 10, 15 years that infuriated someone in government, that they thought they should actually start to putting me on a watch list. Can you imagine all the phone calls they had to monitor where I was talking with somebody at home saying, yeah, I'll pick up a loaf of bread. Yeah. If the cat's sick, then take the cat to the vet. Yeah, look, I don't care. Just take him to the vet. They've got to sort through all of those records at the NSA. That's got to bog them down to the point where I can't imagine they could actually get anything done. The writer says, are they political critics and dissidents and activists? Are they genuinely people we'd regard as terrorists? We're going to find out, apparently, if Greenwald... Well, that is if he doesn't turn up dead. Remember that reporter a few years ago? He was driving down the street in a 30-mile-per-hour zone near his home, and he was going to go meet with someone to expand on a story like this, and then suddenly his car veered and hit a tree, and it exploded, and he burned to death inside? Yeah. But that would never happen in America now, would it? Not in President Obama's America, where the Democrats have a president of the White House, and they love everybody, and they would never do a thing like this. The writer says Mr. Greenwald, who's promoting his new book, No Place to Hide, said the list will be published on The Intercept, the website he established after leaving The Guardian. Of course, now with net neutrality, we may never see that. You go to The Intercept, and all of a sudden a great big picture of Barack Obama will come up with horns coming out of his head. And that'll be the end of your internet. Your computer will start smoking, and you'll never be able to read all of the expose. Well, it happens. It probably happened to you just last week, I'm sure. More details on that on the way, if my name is on the list. I am going to put that atop my resume. Yeah, I am so proud. I will be so proud if it happens. 9:58. Bill Colley with you. Again, as I said earlier, God willing, and the creek don't rise, I'm back in this chair tomorrow between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning. And we'll be spreading more subversion throughout the Magic Valley. And if you'd like to join me on the naughty list, and you don't want President Obama and Santa Claus stopping at your house any longer, please tune in. In the meantime, Rush Limbaugh, as I said earlier, coming up next. 53 at our studios. This is Top Story.